that's so radical. Like most people, they work and work and work by Bible study, prayer, going to church and tithing and doing good works to get saved. And then we've come out of that and said, no, that doesn't save you. And then we got saved. But then, like you said, they work and pray and fast and ask God to give them freedom from sin. And they don't realize that's just as free and doesn't take any
Yeah.
more work
Just as
to get
much a
free from
gift.
sin as it did to get free from the penalty of sin.
Welcome to episode 43 of In Light of the Gospel. Today I'm speaking with a man named Moses Schrock from Ohio. He's a former Schwarzentruber Amish. And those of you that are Amish might laugh at my pronunciation of that. He's got quite a testimony. He was a very early seeker. When he was a very young man, he was seeking truth, seeking righteousness, and he thought it was found in the plainness of his community. His form of Amish seemed to be the most plain, the most simple, the most held back, most alternate from the world, and so it seemed right that his group was the group. But it was quite an extraordinary trek for him to finally come to faith in Christ. And now he's a Bible teacher. He teaches the Bible and preaches at a little group in Ohio that they've started up. And it was a real joy and pleasure to talk to him. I think this story will impact quite a few of you, and I hope that you share it with your friends. I just want to remind you, too, that I do have the audio version of these. I think that's something I often neglect to mention. If you go to Spotify, if you go to Google, if you go to Apple, even if you go to Anchor podcast platform, which is where I record and post my audios, you can find them there as well. So if the video format doesn't work well for you, then please listen to the audio and share it with your friends. So thanks again for tuning in, and God bless you. Heard a lot about you. I've been hearing about your name for years already. I forget where I first heard it, whether it was from the Pearls or someone else. I can't remember,
I
but
see.
it's kind of neat to finally meet you.
Yeah. I was not expecting your face to quite look like this. I thought it looked different on the
On the
Facebook,
video?
but I know on Facebook, like
Oh,
on the
okay.
profile picture. But no, it's great to see you finally in
Gotcha.
person. Well, sort of in person.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was talking to quite a few of your friends or people, acquaintances in your area, and some from, I think your brother Andrew. He doesn't live
Yeah,
too far from you as well.
an hour and 20 minutes. Yeah.
Okay. And they had no concept of where Canada was or how far we were from them. And I opened up the map and I showed them, I'm like, this is the Lake Erie. We're literally just north of Lake Erie.
Yeah.
So if we were to go on a boat straight across from our place to yours, might only be, I don't know, 90 miles, 100 miles, something like that.
What?
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah.
We're just
Yeah,
about,
we've been to Lake Erie. I
we're,
mean, to the Niagara Falls, actually.
okay.
But of course, been to Lake Erie too. But
Right. So Niagara, we did check too that if we take a drive to your place or to your area, then it's almost 5 hours drive because we got to go all the way around to either to
oh,
Niagara Falls and around that way, or Detroit and all the way around the other way, right? So
but that still sounds closer because normally when I think Canada, it sounds like far away.
yeah,
I mean,
no, we're
I've
only
been in
about two
Canada.
hours from the States. So
I see. Yeah, I've been to Canada, but it was out, you know, from Montana. I switched, went
okay,
over the border, but that's way out west.
that's way out west. Yeah. So where are
Yeah.
you originally from then?
I grew up in Worcester, Ohio area.
Okay,
Well, they
so
call it the Lodi community. The Amish called it the Lodi community.
okay.
So
I've heard you make mention too of let's see if I can say this correctly, Schwarzentruber.
yeah, Swartz and Trooper.
Schwarzentruber. That's your
Swartz and Trooper.
background. That's your type of
The
Amish.
Swartz and Trooper Amish, yeah.
Okay, they're the serious ones.
Yeah, they are the real Amish. I think the other ones are kind of the hybrid Amish.
They're all just wannabes.
Exactly.
We have an Amish colony right here, maybe 20 minutes from our place. And my wife grew up right in that area too, so she knows that community fairly well. And I don't know for sure what background they would claim to be, but they're
Or what order
pretty
they are.
serious.
So they're in Canada, they're Amish,
Yeah.
like pretty serious Amish. There are Swartz and Troopers in Canada. I just know Canada, but I don't know what part
Okay.
of Canada.
Yeah.
So
Interesting.
yeah, yeah, we're the
So
real Amish.
The real, like, how do you mean real? Is it just that there was a little bit of pride in the fact that you guys kept rules more strictly, that kind of thing?
We were more strict, and we didn't have electricity or have drivers to take us shopping, and no indoor plumbing. And so if you want to be Amish, to me, we were like for real the lowest of the Amish. And so if I would think about all the different churches and whether you should leave one group and go to another, I was like, everybody could join us because we're the lowest. Like it's you're supposed to stay where you were born and raised in, right? Because Paul told Timothy, keep that which was
That's
committed, or
right.
stay in that which you were taught, or whatever. Bleib in dem, was du gelernt hast.
There you
It's in
go.
German. I cannot remember how exactly it says in English. So I'm like, if you should stay where you were born and raised in, but if you were born and raised higher, then where you're joining to, that would be the right direction because you're going lower. So I was like, everybody could join us, but we couldn't join anybody else because to leave us, we'd have to go higher. There's no,
Interesting.
I thought we were the lowest that there were.
And by lowest, you mean like most
Strictest.
humble, the most strict, the
Well,
most.
yeah, the less convenience, the least
Okay.
conveniences, and the longest hair, basically.
The longest hair?
And the biggest pants, probably.
Okay. I had never heard those claims before.
Well, yeah. I mean, then, well, there was one group that split off of our group that let their hair just a little longer, and their pants were a little bigger.
So you could
So
have potentially gone a little lower.
I guess so. I mean, to go more humble, you have to get more ugly. So
Yeah, that's for
that's
sure.
basically
That's for
what they
sure.
did. So
I
anyhow,
I appreciate your dry sense of humor there. That's good stuff. I was raised old colony Mennonite, but I had to explain. I was in Iowa last week with a bunch of Plain folks there that had
uh-huh.
come out of Plain groups, and a lot of them were from your area. And I tried to explain to
Okay.
them that the religion that I was raised in is called Old Colony Mennonite, but I was
Yeah.
never raised in a colony. I was
Oh yeah.
raised, born and raised in Canada. I wore store-bought clothes. We had electricity. I went to public school. I was raised like a normal Canadian kid, right? But if you go back to Mexico, where my parents were born and raised, or even my wife, she was born and then raised till she was 6 years old in Mexico. There they had little colony based on the number, like you were from Campo 66 or Campo 45, something like that, right? So all these little villages were little colonies. But
Mm.
here in Canada, I still prided myself on being more humble than most people. But the Amish, that was just ridiculous. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
they had gone too far or
Yeah.
had held back too much.
That just goes to show that whatever group you're with feels the right group.
That's
It
right.
doesn't matter who it is. You think you're the right group just because, not because you're necessarily right or based on the Bible more. It's because it's familiar
Yeah.
and it just feels right. So it's kind of more of an emotion based truth. It feels
Yeah.
right and it's not based in facts. And I used to think that everybody else outside of our groups probably is not, they probably know that they're a little off and they're just kind of playing the game, but we know we're right, but they probably don't.
At least
But
you're
then
serious.
yeah, and so you just kind of assume that others aren't that convinced because how can they be? We're the only ones that are really right.
And it depends on what you're measuring it by, right? You were measuring it by plainness, by humility, as your version of humility, even ugliness, as you said. And so clearly there was no one else that was measuring up to what you guys did, right?
Yeah, and the measuring stick that we went by, or and that wasn't a good one. How should I say this? It wasn't a good perception. It might have been a good measuring stick because we thought we were using Christ as our measuring stick. But my
Hmm.
perception of how we were living out Christ's example was off because I thought it's important to try to live physically like Christ, meaning he didn't have modern conveniences.
Hmm.
So I just had a very hard time picturing Christ driving a car. So how can we drive a car? I had a hard time imagining him doing all these modern things. So I was like, well, the least of the modern conveniences that you've got, the more like Christ you are.
Interesting.
But like I said, that perception was not accurate at all because we still had a lot of things that Christ didn't.
For sure.
We
He had
had
no place
guns,
to
we
lay his
had,
head.
right. We had guns, we had diesel powered engines, we had a manure spreader, we had modern stuff that's modern, way more modern than what he had. And we wore things he didn't wear. We didn't dress the same, even though we thought we were dressing different from the world and being more like Christ, yet we were not dressed like Christ at all. In
Right.
fact, Christ, I don't think he ever wore a hat, but if you're caught wearing, going to town without a hat, you got in trouble.
That's right.
That's not Christ-like. So our perception was that we're Christ-like because we're different and humble and all of that, but we weren't actually Christ-like even in the physical sense, which is not even that important. The spiritual part, living with the relationship with the Father and blessing other people and treating your neighbor as yourself, loving your neighbor as yourself, which is what really matters, which is what Christ exemplified. That, for some reason, we didn't really focus on that. We were just kind of had this vague idea. If you have a life separated from the world in that physical sense, then you hopefully are on the right track.
Interesting. Actually, for me, when I became a Christian is when I became more plain. And I did it kind of for the same reasons, where I thought the old colony had it correct. But if you watch the real old colony people, the ones that maybe just came from Mexico or the ones that still live more plain, they would wear homemade clothes. The women would wear a long veil. They would clearly never wear pants or anything like that. Men would, dress plain and simple, maybe suspenders and, very, very simple. And so when I became a Christian, I was liberated in the sense that I knew my sins were forgiven, but now I wanted to obey God. How do you do that? Well, do the things that I was taught from young on, but do it actually. Right? The old colony people in Canada weren't doing it anymore. So I actually went to a very plain group for a little while, or a fairly plain group. They still had electricity and whatnot, but clothing and outward appearance meant very much to me for a little while. So it was my skewed understanding of what righteousness is or what right living looks like, right?
Well, that's the beautiful thing about that. You can be born again and truly become a Christian, but God gives you time to figure things out. That doesn't mean you get become a Christian over time. You're just learning how to live out who you now are.
Yeah.
So
interestingly enough, after about 3 years at that more plain group, we heard one of the ladies say that she took a lot of pride. She didn't say proud, but I interpreted it this way. She said, I take pride in the fact that when I'm walking down the street in our local town, people know which group I belong to. And and we just
seriously
thought, oh no, that's not what we want to be.
Who are you portraying, the group or Christ?
That's right. And it was like there was pride and humility again, pride and plainness, pride and simplicity. And it was like you kind of missed the boat here, right?
Yeah. Sadly, people do that. They miss it.
So maybe tell me a little bit more about your childhood. What was it like then, growing up so plain, and or even your personal conscience and feelings of God? Was there a lot of that early on, or was it just tradition?
Well, we were out. It's a culture, so a lot of the things that we were taught wasn't so much parents sitting us down and teaching us. It was more caught than taught. It's just you just pick it up. It's amazing how strong you can be taught things without actually them intentionally sitting you down and saying, this is what we believe and this is what we stand for. It's more like them reacting to the latest happenings in the community and what's happening in church, and then you just pick it up from them talking about it and their reaction, their strong emotional reactions. And so, but I do remember Mom and Dad sharing things from the scriptures, and they were very sincere about living what they believed was right. And so I always attribute my path to finding God to them, instilling that deep conviction for what was right. Even though we might have been off, at least we had that deep conviction. I mean, I remember when I was probably 10, 11, or I don't remember how old, pretty young, Mom one time said that, if you're bad, you have to go to the fire. So I thought about that just the other day, and would I have believed and really understood there was a hell if Mom wouldn't have just told us? Because in church, yeah, I did hear about hell in church, but I've heard of a person who grew up in our community, different district, but in our general community, that she didn't know there was a hell until she left. So, which that was shocking to me, but
Yeah.
just goes to show that if the parents don't really share truth with the children, they don't really learn that much, because church is a lot of it is in High German, and they don't really speak. They have this chant when they preach, so you don't really pick up unless you're really listening. You don't really pick up a lot. So I grew up with knowing some, the Bible stories, the Old Testament Bible stories, Cain and Abel, and Abraham and Isaac, and Moses and the children of Israel. But I was not very familiar at all with the Bible. I remember thinking that Jesus died 4 times, because you'd read it 4 different times. You go to one gospel to the next. And my dad said, no, that's just one time. I was, wow, oh, okay. I thought he died 4 times.
Oh,
So
he rose from the dead. Why not?
yeah,
You
I was young and I didn't think it through how
Yeah.
weird that would be, that it wouldn't fit at all. But we had a King James Bible that a friend gave my dad, and I remember trying to read it a little bit, but it's just so different. But as far as my perception of the Bible and versus culture, I knew some scripture. I actually memorized the Sermon on the Mount, at least the whole 5th chapter. I don't believe I went past the 5th chapter in German. And I memorized some of the speech little sayings that the preachers quoted every Sunday, like I think it was 1st or 2nd Peter, Gelobet sei Gott und der Herr. I could just say that, blessed be the God and Father. I think that's, I can't remember, the 1st or 2nd Peter. So I memorized some scriptures that the preachers said all the time. And of course, Psalm 103. I don't know if your church did that too, where the preachers would bless God or thank and praise the Lord with Psalms from Book of Psalms. 106 was the thanking passage, and 103 was the praise passage.
Okay. So
They
you memorized
always,
most of those.
well, they would quote the first few verses of each of those chapters every Sunday. That was their opening praise and thanks to God.
I see.
Either that, or I think it was 147. So I had a pretty sensitive conscience, and but it was trained to feel bad about things that weren't necessarily scripture, but culture.
Okay.
And what your peers thought about you. So I had some not Bible knowledge, but it was mostly I was taught you have to stay where you were raised in.
Yep.
And I thought, well, we were the best anyhow, as far as the plainest. And to ever think of leaving, like, if the thought came to me, like later in my teens, about leaving because other people left, then I was like, where would I go? We're living more like Jesus than anybody else, so where would I go? So I was thinking, so in the physical, in the carnal realm, thinking very carnally.
So it wasn't even so much a personal justification, like you yourself were good enough, but that if there is a good enough group, you're part of it now, so there's nowhere else to go. Do you yourself felt kind of defiled at times, or guilty for not?
Yeah, I do remember
tradition?
one instance. I don't remember what I did. I think it was just a general feeling of my unworthiness, because I'd get angry or fight with my siblings. But I do remember there was an old, used to be an outhouse behind our house that we now use for smoking, but to put the meat inside of it and smoke it. That's what it was used for then, but I think it was just sitting there. I don't remember when we used it last, but I went inside of that, and I was just I'm going to hide from God, because I just had this dread that God is not pleased with me, and I'm trying to hide from him. I don't think an outhouse is a good place to hide from God, but I for some reason, that's a memory that sticks with me, because way when I was probably early teens.
I see.
So
I often have, somebody shared a children's story years ago. They were talking about the book of Jonah, and I've often shared it with my kids and with kids at church too. Like, just the concept that you know who God is, you know how big he is, you know how he views the world from outside. And then you hear his little Jonah, this little speck on this big ball that we call Earth. And Jonah's going to run away from God. And he goes from here to there. And you think
Oh,
you can
yeah.
escape the presence of God by running from him or hiding in a
Yeah,
barn.
it's very foolish, but
But it is a childlike thinking, right?
it's,
Where,
yeah, yeah. And I do remember sitting in church and listening to the preacher saying that we're seeking to get closer to God. I don't know. Do you know Dutch or no at all or not? But
no, I would have learned German a little bit. Low High
okay.
German was what the Bible was in and the songs were in, but we spoke mostly Plattdeutsch, Low German.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So it's not Pennsylvania Dutch,
No.
but it would, I would listen to most of the message. I think I was pretty good at keeping my attention on what they were saying. I don't know why, but so I remember a lot of the things even today, what they would talk about, even though I've been out for 2 decades or whatever,
Yeah.
or one. Now, see, I left in '02, so yeah, about 20, a little over 20 years. So yeah, and I would think, how do you get closer to God, and things like that. And another message they always emphasize is bearing your cross,
Okay.
which I think they meant being lowly and work hard and
Yeah.
not do with chainsaw, but just use the cross cut and things like that. And but to me, I was like, practically, how do you bear your cross? Is it something you do, and how do you do it?
Yeah.
So it's just deep questions that would kind of surface, but then you kind of forget again and
You
you
just
move on.
dismiss it and move
Yeah,
on.
dismiss it or not be able to follow through and really seek it out.
Okay.
So like a young mind that just thought would come through, and then that's about as far as it would go.
Yeah. Yeah, when we got baptized at Old Colony, my wife and I, there was a poem that they gave us, and it was in German. And it said something about the cross also, and that the cross, it was referring to a woman's hair. And the longer the hair, the better. Yeah, it's a cross to deal with, but if you cut off certain portions, cut off more, then at the end, your cross might not be quite enough to get you across the cavern to where God is, right? Like there's this great gulf fixed between us and God, and your cross is going to get you there. And so if you are making your cross lighter and shorter, in this case by cutting your hair, then when you get to the end, your cross might not be long enough to get you to God, right?
Yeah, that's I never heard that, but there are ridiculous crosses out there like that.
Yeah.
People come up with some very strange beliefs of what they think they have to do to cross that cavern.
Yeah.
But I never
So,
heard that one.
okay.
That's
You
wow.
left the Amish in 2002, you said.
Yeah.
And if I remember correctly, somebody told me last week that you're probably late 30s.
It's a little past.
Okay. So,
40.
okay. So we're very much the same age, and we
Oh,
probably got
okay.
saved very much the same time. I'm
I
going to be
see.
41 in September. And
Same here.
okay, September 18th.
28.
Oh, there you go. I'm 10 days older.
Wow.
But I got saved when I was 21.
Yeah, I would have been 20, I think.
Okay. And so
But,
when you struck out, I heard your story a little bit online. You struck out away from the Amish. What brought that on? How would you ever dare leave if this was the
well,
group?
there were a number of things. So, like I said, my parents instilled in me, to their demise, religiously speaking, against their religion. I mean, if you teach your children too well, they might end up leaving your religion. But so I remember my dad having a talk with me and my brother Andrew about boys thing, young men stuff like sexual purity and things like that. And it really instilled a deep conviction in me that I want to live right, live pure, and really, really serve God. And that I believe, I always wondered what made me different or start thinking different, because when you're growing up, you always plan on, being Amish and being faithful to what you were taught and make your grandparents proud and join the church,
Mm-hmm.
and your parents, obviously, and the preachers. But why then, being all sincere and having no plans of ever being different, what made me start thinking different? And I think I can trace it back to that talk with my dad,
Hmm.
and which I didn't know at the time, but I believe that's when the trajectory moved, where I started on a different path without realizing it. Because then that deep conviction started making me more serious and think about hell. And, and then when things didn't line up in the culture, for instance, two church splits by the time I'm old enough to join the church.
Mm-hmm.
A church split into three different groups, and now there's three groups in the same neighborhood saying we are not brothers and sisters, and yet we look very different, and everybody's just as sincere as everybody else. So that told
Right.
me sincerity doesn't do it, because they're sincere too, and they're wrong. They have to be, because if we're not brothers and sisters, that means somebody's not in the family. God doesn't have more than one family. So if we're not brothers and sisters, somebody's not in the family.
Wow.
So I then began to wonder, well, who is really not in the family? Because we're all pretty much the same. And if we are wrong, if we all are part of the family, or were, then we're still wrong, because we're disagreeing. It's wrong to disagree. Like anyway, it would just jump. My mind got so jumbled in all these different churches that it just really, really confused me. I couldn't figure it out. It's just too much for my brain to
Yeah.
wrap around all this. So that was one of the reasons. I think I can trace it back to that talk we had with Dad, and then struggling to live a pure life, not even feeling like I could be good enough to join the church. And then, of course, the church is all split up. And
Hmm.
then, so the personal struggles, not being good enough, which my dad was in the band over and over all my young growing up
Oh,
years,
really?
because he couldn't overcome sin. So he'd be put in a band because he confessed it to the church again. And then they'd put him out for, I don't remember, 2 or 3 weeks or 6 weeks or whatever. And then he'd be sad and depressed, and it would affect the whole family, and it would just continue over and over and over. So I was like, I don't want that kind of life. I don't care what. And I felt like I couldn't overcome my stuff either. So that's what it looked like it would be for me, is I would have to go, if I joined the church, then I would have to confess my struggles, which would be very embarrassing.
Yeah.
And now, if it's like my dad, I wouldn't be able to stop. So it'd just be like just struggling over and over. And so I'm like, that's not for me. So
Wow.
that was really one of the main reasons why I decided I don't want to join the Amish, because it looked like a life of struggling and embarrassing, confessing. And then, of course, once that's in your heart, and then you start thinking of some other things, the church splits and then that not lining up, because you used to just kind of accept it. Well, they're wrong.
For sure.
Parents chose the right church, everybody else is wrong. You just kind of adopt that. But when you start questioning some things, then that issue kind of came up too. You have to start, you start thinking through things that don't make sense. And then the other thing is the fear of hell. I was laying in bed one night just trying to imagine being in hell for millions of years, until literally I had tears running down the side of my cheeks, running down my eyes, and just the horror of not not just how bad it is, but how long it would be, that you'd never ever get out.
Yeah.
And that drove me to decide I don't care what it costs me, where I have to go to find out I'm not going there. Because we were taught you just do the best you can. I even remember my dad, he's worried that I'm not going to join the church, and we were going somewhere in the buggy, and he said, he's trying to kind of talk me back into it, which that's another thing. We didn't have good communication between us and my parents. So if I'm struggling with something, I didn't just go and talk to them about it, and they didn't
But they
talk to me
knew
too much
they knew there
either.
was a struggle.
Right. Oh yeah. it would pop up, and there was back and forth, which I kind of forgot most of it. But they said, see, now that we talk, they ended up leaving too. But so we can go back and talk about that. And they said, oh yeah, we had arguments and debates, and I don't even remember them.
Okay.
But I do remember this one thing where Dad said, all I know is just do the best you can and hope that you'll make it.
Yeah.
And in my mind, I was in my shell and I didn't counter it at all. But in my mind, I'm thinking, but it's not good enough for me. I can't just hope and,
Interesting.
having that possibility of dying and then finding out, oh, I was wrong and I can't make it, but it's too late then. That's too scary. I had to have some
Wow.
assurance.
But with your dad regularly confessing his wrong to the church, that obviously built something into you too, where it kind of developed this idea that I'm going to be honest, I'm going to be open, right? Where a lot of Mennonite and Amish men would continue in sin and just not tell the church, right?
That is something else that I very much appreciate about my parents. They didn't put on this fake religious, fake spiritual show. So that went a long ways to yeah, they were honest, and it went a long ways in not us just giving up on Christianity at all. Even though they were failed, at least they were honest. So that covered for a lot of that failure. And that was instilled to us, just to be honest about ourselves.
Wow. I was talking to a guy named Leroy. You probably know who I'm referring to.
Time.
Yeah, and he said he remembers clearly the day when you were supposed to be joining the church, and I think it was maybe your dad or your grandpa walked in, and there was tears in their eyes. I forget how it all went. I can't quite picture it, but I'm sure it's probably still pretty fresh in your mind even. That was when you decided to leave then, I guess.
Well, I don't remember that because I wasn't there.
Right, of course.
I wasn't in the church that Sunday. I was hiding. They had to go to church without me that morning.
You were hiding.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
But it came right down to the wire, right? When you were going to become a member.
well, that's you don't get to become a member in one Sunday, except at the end. Like you take these baptismal classes all summer, like 9 of them or 8 of them. And then the 9th one, you get baptized and become an official member. But so I started and it's in the springtime. You start you join the preachers to their little secret place, and they teach you the rules and the doctrines of the church. And the third class, they went through the church rules of what we believe, and of course it's all by memory, so they try to just remember all the rules, how white your
no
hat
catechism or anything.
Well, I think I remember they were supposed to read the confessions of faith, or whatever it's called, the articles of faith in the prayer book that we had. And then I don't remember what the first 2 classes they covered, but the third one had the rules of the church, how wide your hat needs to be and the string on your hat and the pants and all these different rules about clothing and what you can do and not do. And he said, we have time, us, the participants have time to think it over if we want to adopt them. And I thought that meant for 2 weeks. And by next church Sunday, which we don't have church every Sunday, so the next church Sunday, I would have to make it. Somehow that got in my mind that I would have to promise them to keep the rules. And I was on the edge this whole time already. And I was just going along with it, figured, well, I can go one summer yet before it becomes known that I'm different. So I don't have to face the shame and the embarrassment of the community. Well, this is where it came to the wire. I was like, I'm not going to make any promises before I know for sure. I still wasn't sure. I thought maybe I will join the Amish yet, but I'm just not ready yet to make that promise and that commitment. And rather than just doing the what you normally should do and just tell your parents, no, I need some more time to think about it and just talk it over and calmly just tell them where I stand. And I couldn't face the drama that I figured would ensue, so I just hid that Sunday morning. I didn't tell them during the week, those 2 weeks. I just planned that Sunday morning, I'm just going to hide. I didn't know where to go, so I'm not leaving. I'm not leaving the Amish. I don't know where to go.
Yeah.
Which I was under tremendous pressure all that
Wow.
time because, well, certainly after that, came under a lot of pressure just because I knew everybody's wondering, well, what does he believe? He's still here and he's not joining the church. So where's he going to go? I didn't know where I'm going to go. But yeah, Sunday morning, I wasn't around. I left a letter in my room and said, "You've dragged my feet far enough. I am not joining church. I have a flaw." That's what I call it. Remember, I said I have a flaw in my life that I can't overcome. So I don't think I brought up that dad struggles and he can't overcome, and that's not what I want. And that really hit him. And he had to agree that if my life doesn't work, if my religion doesn't work, then why he had a very weak case to convince his son to join what he's a part of that doesn't work.
Wow.
So I was gone that Sunday morning and they had to go to church without me. I think it was a very rough morning for them.
And how old were you then?
I was I think I was 19 or about to be. No,
Okay.
I would have been 18 yet, because by the time I was to get baptized, I think I would have been. No, actually, I was thinking it was 17. I was expected to be baptized
Okay.
around 18 because then I left like a year later, so I was 19 when I left.
Wow. At Old Colony, you do go through a baptismal class too, but there's no rules that you have to listen to or learn that way
Oh,
as far
really?
as clothing style and stuff. That wasn't really talked about. Basically, confess your faults and learn the memory verses and answer the correct questions. You know, you could read the book when you're up there. You didn't have to memorize it. Back in Mexico, my parents had to memorize the answers. Now you could just read them, and it was most people did it just out of tradition, and most people did it because they wanted to get married, and you couldn't get married until you'd been
Oh, yeah,
baptized.
yeah.
And so there was very few people who were thinking about it as seriously as what it sounds like you were, where you were like, this is not consistent. I can't do this because it doesn't align with what I'm living, right? So I mean, sounds like you were a pretty serious young man at that stage.
Well, yeah. I mean, I guess I was deeply concerned about my future destiny, and which is I find it interesting myself sometimes looking back that a young man growing up in a culture that's very secluded, I didn't have somebody from the outside trying to persuade me and give me different ideas. I mean, I would hear about people leaving the Amish and, oh, now they claim to have joy and peace that they didn't have before.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, yeah, right. They just want the car and the truck and stuff. But so I dismissed that. So it wasn't like other people were trying to persuade me. It's just that internal confusion within the church, within the community, didn't line up. And a guy that thinks very detailed like me, like I like to say it this way, I couldn't just run across the gravel driveway. I had to crawl up and down the stones like an
Hmm.
ant. The small stuff was big for me. I had to process it very minutely. And so if one stone was different than another, I had to figure out why and all that. So
Okay.
if things were not consistent, it confused me. Other people could just run over it, didn't bother them. But for me, if it was inconsistent and it meant that, which to me, that meant somebody's going to hell. If,
Yeah.
if we're not brothers and sisters, somebody's going to hell then. Well, who is it? And how do I find out I'm not in the wrong church? Because we're all sincere. So sincerity doesn't make you right. So I could be wrong. Anyway, so where were we? I don't remember how you got me off on
You
that.
were 17, you got baptized, or you were about to go through with the whole baptism thing. And you said at 19 you left, but somewhere in that stage of life.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I guess you were saying I was serious, but I was going to say I didn't have any outside influence,
Right, right.
but I did have some books about, like from Christmas Carol Kaufman, Danny of Cedar Cliffs, Not Regina, and I had The Drummer's Wife, which is a story from the Martyr's Mirror.
Okay.
And so those stories of people leaving the church back in the Catholic days, like back in the Reformation, really parallel with my experience that they are part of a system and they have to sneak out. Like Not Regina is a book about a young lady, probably a fictional character, but it's based on true stories. But Christmas Carol Coffin put a story together, and about a fictional character named Regina who left her, actually not the Catholic Church, but the Reformed Church,
Okay.
Zwingli Reformed Church, and she had to sneak out of the house to get baptized. And I could so identify with this thing of hiding and sneaking out. Not that I sneaked out that much, didn't really know where to sneak to at that time.
But you had to hide your
But I had
questioning.
to, like, as I thought I did, I had to just hide when I didn't want to join the church
Mm-hmm.
because of the. But then my parents, actually my mom, I do remember she saying, if you don't want to join the church, you don't have to join the church. That's your decision. But I guess I just didn't want to face the drama.
Okay. But then it still took a year or so before you finally left the
Yeah,
community.
that's the time of deep lot of pressure, because mom comes home from church one day. We all come home from church one day, and she says, yeah, the deacon's wife just was like, well, where's he going to go? Talking about me. And mom's like, I don't know. And of course I couldn't answer because I didn't know. I was still seeking. I didn't know where to go. I was hoping the Mennonites had it together and they weren't all split up, because the Amish are all split up. So there's no hope finding a true church there to go to
Yeah.
heaven. So I have to find maybe the Mennonites, because I knew they had a split back in 1693. We had a Menno Simmons book in my dad's desk. He had one there in German. So I read some of that. I read Martyr's Mirror. And so through that, I found out there was a split somewhere. Somehow I figured out there was a split way back. And I thought, well, maybe the
When the
Mennonites had
Mennonites
it.
and the Amish split.
Yeah. I kind of had the idea the Anabaptists had the truth before the split. All these splits took part. And so my faith was sort of in that rooted back into the Anabaptists, but I didn't know which side carried the faith forward.
Right.
I thought the Amish lost it because they're all split up. So I thought maybe the Mennonites kept the church together and carried the truth forward. So I was wanting to join them, I thought. But then I got a book from, I think, Stephen Nolt, where he documents all the different Mennonite churches and where they started and
All the
split
splits.
all over, just split all into pieces. So, there goes my hope to join them. So I was like, I don't know where to go. It's like so hopeless.
Wow.
When your salvation is based on the church, you
Yeah.
think, and the church is all split up, you're kind of hopeless, which
Absolutely.
thank God for that. That is.
It's almost like it was designed in a sense to rob us of our security in our community or in our church, right? I was kind of the same way.
That's the positive thing about church splits, is robs you of that false security.
Where was your joy? Where was your confidence, right?
Yeah, I didn't have faith in Christ. I had faith in the church.
Yeah. And even that was on shaky ground, because we had the same thing, right? You can't blows hooten. You can't have confidence. There's no assurance of salvation. You can only hope, and if there's any hope for anyone, it's probably us. There might not
we're the
be.
closest to it, so it probably is us. And somehow they have this. Wouldn't you say they do have some sort of a confidence? Because when you leave, they come at you very confident, like you're wrong and we're right.
Yeah,
they come across that way.
And if you do leave here, very likely you'll end up in hell.
Yeah, then they know where you're going.
Yeah.
But if you're still with them, you don't know for sure. But once you leave, then they know.
Right. Interestingly enough, there's a very, very staunch Reform group close to us here too. And they're like Dutch Reform, very, very strict. They would be considered hyper-Calvinists. They'll have a church of like 2,000 plus people, and maybe from what I've heard, maybe 6 or 10 people will go up and take part in communion. The rest know they're not saved. But if you ever decide to leave, then you're in real serious danger, because if ever God is going to save someone, it's probably going to be at this church. We don't have confidence.
You mean that's not just an Amish problem?
It's funny, eh?
You're the church that when you leave us, you're lost.
There's very few Reformed churches that are still that staunch. But I remember hearing a very famous preacher once named Vodi Bakum. Him and a few others were on a panel discussing hyper-Calvinism. And somebody said, oh, that term hyper-Calvinism is thrown around all the time, but nobody's actually I've never met a real hyper-Calvinist. And then Vodi Bakum says, have you ever been to Ontario, Canada? And I think he was referring to our group. And I've got a couple friends that got saved out of that group. And man, it's harder for them, I think, to get saved in some ways than for an Amish or a Mennonite. But
yeah, well, I found out when I left that this problem I had It's not unique. It's not an
No,
Amish problem.
that's
It's a
right.
human problem. You just tend to want to be comfortable where you're grown, where you're raised in, and the people above you want to keep you there.
Yeah.
So,
So then you
yep,
struck out on your own. You were a young single man,
yep, yeah. The day came when I decided I'm going to run off, and that's what I did.
not knowing where for sure you were going. You had some ideas.
Well,
You had read a book.
yeah, I had a book, another book that the same Mennonite neighbor gave me that book on the all those split up Mennonites. He gave me a
Yeah.
book from by Peter Hoover called "The Secret of Their Strength." I don't know if you've heard of that book or
No.
seen it. Do you know what it's about?
No, I'm assuming something to do with martyrs as well.
With what?
Martyrs?
Oh, martyrs. Yes, it was about the Anabaptists, what they believed and what they suffered, and how they had the fire and the zeal of God, and they didn't just get persecuted from the Catholics, but also from the Protestants. You know, the
Yeah.
Zwinglians and the Lutherans. So they were really caught between all these different groups and got persecuted very bad. And yet they really they set Europe on fire basically. And anyhow, I was reading that book that one night and stayed up till 5 in the morning, which is I was never able to stay up late. Excuse me. Was never able to stay up late reading a book. Yank that out. Never able to stay up late reading a book, but that night that thing just lit me up. Like, this is
Wow.
exactly what I'm looking for. Somebody, they actually have it. They knew they had it, and the
Willing
way
to
that,
die for it.
yeah. And so it really encouraged me that finally God is answering my prayer, because I was thinking, since nobody seems to have the faith anymore, churches are all split. I got to go back before all the splits and find the root of our faith, and figure out, what the truth is. But it looks so hopeless, because how do I find the right, where are the books, and how can I research all this, and I don't have access to things like that. And then this book had it all laid out, had it all. That's what I was looking for, basically. I mean, God really had a specific answer for the way I was thinking I had to find the truth, is the way he answered, even though, you could just go to the Bible and find it. But so that really encouraged me, lit me up. And then I'm thinking, well, I gotta find the author of this book, which meant,
He was still around.
yeah, well, no, actually he had moved on from where he used to live when he wrote that book. But as far as I know, he's still alive, but I've never met him. But there was a phone number in that book, and the name of the place, the name of the church, I think. And so I decided I'm going to Shippensburg, Pennsylvania. I'm going
There
to
you
run
go.
away and just run off and not tell anybody.
I see. Just leave a note and leave, or not even that.
Um, I didn't even leave a note. I
Wow.
left I left like probably 8 in the morning or something. So it wasn't in the nighttime, because I was pretending to leave to visit another Amish community. A
Uh-huh.
friend of mine, this is how it worked out. So I'm thinking, how am I going to leave? How am I going to leave? And then a friend of mine, one of my friends who we were going to join the church together, and then I dropped out and he had to continue by himself. That young man offered or invited me to join him to visit another community down in Southern Ohio. He had a girlfriend down there, and he was going to go down there and see her, and then I could come along, and they'd probably force me on a date down there. But anyhow, so I said, sure, I'll go along. But instantly I'm thinking I could just pretend that's where I'm going to go. And then the first bus stop, I'll just get off, and he goes on his way, keeps going his way. And I go to Shippensburg.
Mm-hmm.
So, but of course I don't know if it'll work out, but at least I could see if it doesn't. And then if it doesn't work out, well, I'll just go on a visit down in Southern Ohio and come home. And that's as far as it went. Well, so I tell my parents, this guy invited me to go along, and they thought it was a good idea. And so mom makes sure I had the clothes, and even made an extra pair of, I think it was a vest for me, and made sure I had everything I needed. I felt bad for her, because I was not planning on actually going. And Friday morning arrives, and I get on what we call the Amish bus, which is we weren't allowed to drive or hire a driver, but we were allowed to get on a bus that was dedicated for just hauling people. And we had one that would haul Amish only, that would pick up people in our community. You just have to go out on the right road where they're passing by. So I go out there, I get on the bus, and I tell him I want to get off in Worcester, and he overheard me, and they said, "I thought you're going with me. Your parents said that you're going down with me." And I said, they didn't know their beans. So I get off of Worcester. He goes on, kind of confused. He's probably very suspicious. And I get on that evening, I get on a trailways or whatever it was, and I make my way to Pennsylvania. And my parents that didn't know where I went, they didn't know about this. They were always suspicious, I think, that they knew I wanted to leave, but they didn't know I was doing it that weekend. Next morning, or actually it was afternoon, 1 o'clock, I arrived in Shippensburg, Pennsylvania. 5-hour layover in one of the cities on the way out. So,
man, that must have been a crazy time for you, leaving the community like that, getting on a worldly bus and heading into a strange town. You had money and food and stuff?
Well, I had saved up my dollar bills over the years from loading slab wood. We grew up in a sawmill, so whenever we helped somebody load slab wood, they normally would give me a dollar bill or something, and Mom and Dad let us keep that.
Okay.
So over the years, I had saved about $100, and I think the ticket cost 70 or so. And so I had enough money for a one-way ticket, and so that's all the money I had, probably $30 left or so.
Man.
And then on the way out, I called that number that was in that book, which so now I would never do that. I'd call before I even left to make sure it works out. But I just started. I went on this bus and just figured, well, see, I didn't have a very realistic expectation of how it's going to go. I'm thinking there's this special group out in PA that is really dedicated to God because they know what the Anabaptists believe, and they're probably all huddled together every day and being all spiritual and just praying and talking and fellowshipping, and they're probably not even working much. I had this hyper spiritual mentality, because if you want to really be serious about God, isn't that what you do? You're really spiritual. And see, I'm all works oriented. So I had this mental image that they're probably just having church every day. And I want to check out these people. And if they're not who I think they might be, then I might just come back. I don't know. I'm just going to check them out. I wasn't thinking about actually leaving and staying there and needing a place to live and all that. So I just go out and I call on the way, and it's one of the members of the church. And then he gives me the pastor's number, and I call him at the next bus stop. And I kind of spread out my calls during the trip. And then he mentioned that, so you're probably going to need a place to stay. And I said, oh, yeah, I guess I will. And so that's the first that actually dawned on me that I need somebody to let me stay at the house. So that's how that worked out. He came out to the gas station where the bus dropped me off there in Shippensburg, the Sheetz gas station, and picked me up. He brought another guy from the church with him who could speak Dutch. And you probably know the story, how he was afraid I was some bum claiming to be from the Amish.
Oh, really?
And so he was figuring I'm just looking for a place to stay, and it would be easier to claim to be from the Amish. Be easy to find a place to stay.
But when you called, you told him what you were after, what you were concerned about?
I don't remember what all I said, but I think I told him I'm from the Amish, and that I don't know what I said. Probably something about looking for the truth or something.
Yeah.
And so he thought I'm probably not, he didn't know if I was sincere, if it was true that I'm from the Amish. So he brought this guy along that knew Dutch. And when they got to the gas station, Harvey just took one look at me and said, he's for real. So I was still dressed in the dark Amish clothes and the wool hat, the felt hat.
The long hair, the big
long
pants.
hair. And So there's just no way to fake that. So
The obvious accent and all that.
yeah, he didn't even hear me yet. He just looked at me and he could tell I was the real deal.
Wow.
So
So they took you in and started sharing with you, or how?
yeah, I visited John Martin's place. I visited the other guy that had called first. What's his name? Slipping my mind right now. But Lynn Martin was the pastor. I visited his house. But then I stayed at Harvey Wright's place at the there in the community, and
He wrote the
probably the
book.
best. Hmm?
He wrote that book.
No, Peter was the one that wrote it.
Okay.
Peter Hoover was the one that wrote it, but he
Right.
had moved on already. But
So,
that's where I that's that was a great place for me. Probably the best family I could have stayed with because just stability and a place for me to learn. I got a job next door. A guy, their renter just across the yard, had just lost one of his guys or quit working for him. So he hired me, and within a week or so, I was working and making some money, and I could buy tapes and books. And but I wasn't surprised that they were just sitting around having church every day. I don't. That's just how your mind can make mental pictures, and then when you show up, you realize, oh
they
well,
still have to work to make a
they
living.
were working and driving and living a normal American life as far as that goes, working every
Yeah.
day, working hard, and church on Sundays and prayer meetings Wednesday nights.
Okay. And there you started kind of hearing some of the truth of the gospel already, or was it still more lifestyle for you at that point?
It wasn't so much lifestyle, I don't think, because that was a dramatic change for me, even though they dressed plain compared to most, the rest of the world. Um, but I remember thinking, this is so different, yet it doesn't feel that different.
Hmm.
I mean, I'm driving to work in a truck now, but which I rarely ever drove with a vehicle, sometimes with a neighbor, but not that much. So lifestyle was very different, but I knew it wasn't about that. So I got past a lot of that about culture and church splits. Now at that point, I understood that you can have that experience where you're saved. And by
Okay.
then, that's what I was looking for. I was looking for an experience where I could say, okay, I got this major experience, and now I'm born again, and I'm a Christian, and so that's what I was looking for. But it just wouldn't
And
come.
you were looking for that at church meetings and sermons, and
Yeah.
hoping that something would finally push you over the edge.
Yep. Yep.
Interesting. And how long were you with that family?
I'd say almost not quite 2 years,
Okay.
and then they were having another baby, so they wanted me to move out. So I moved in with another family, and probably no, I guess I must have been only about a year because my total time out in PA was around 2 years. So it must have been about a year I lived with that family, and then I moved in with another family, Corey Byler's, and then um, that's when I got a hold of these tapes called "Sin No More" from Mike
Okay.
Pearl, and I was living at that place when I was listening to those messages to and from work. I had my car by then that only had a tape player, old 91 Chevy Cavalier. I'm playing those tapes to and from work,
Yep.
and I was struggling with sin still, and I I was pretty confident by then I had gotten saved, but still had these sins issues that I was dealing with, and that's that's how I got free from sin, is through listening to those messages in the car. And well, the final message that really opened my eyes and I had pretty major experience is when I was up in my room listening to the message, and my eyes were open to the fact that we're dead to sin and alive to God through Christ.
Okay. And that affected you pretty deeply.
That was that was like the, what do you call that? The continental divide,
Yep.
like the watershed. Everything goes the other way.
For sure.
That's like when everything went the other way. Like up until then, I was seeking for things from God, asking God, praying to God, hoping like if I went to a revival meeting, I would get it. And just having my heart open to get some, to receive. Will this do it? Will this do it? After that, there was no more. I had it. I knew I had it. I was 100% like I shut myself off from trying to receive from, at a Bible study or at a revival meeting or a church, because they would preach, you got to die to yourself.
Yeah.
You got to ask God, you got to pray, you got to do all these things. I actually shut that off, shut my heart off from that idea, because I had such a special gift called crucifixion, death, burial, and resurrection with Christ, and I didn't want to lose it.
Yeah.
So the idea, I mean, I'm still kind of narrow-minded, I guess, in my thinking. So in my mind, now that I know that all Christians are dead to sin and buried, are risen again with Christ, and I had that revelation, I understood that that's God gave it to me through the preaching of the gospel, gave me this, my eyes were open, my heart,
Yeah.
my inner eyes, and I understood it for the first time that I was dead to sin. So I would guard my heart from any message that would come in and try to take that away from me.
And there's plenty of them around, eh?
Oh yeah, it's all over.
Especially in those revival
I
type
could
settings.
share this. I'm sorry. There's nobody that I could share this with. I felt like that I
That's
had died
interesting.
with Christ.
Because I got saved by understanding. It was from two preachers, one named Roman Kaufman, one named Jerry Mahor. You're probably familiar with the names.
I've listened to their sermons.
Salvation Crystal Clear and the Worth of a Soul. And wow. I saw in my mind's eye Christ crucified, beaten to a bloody pulp. I think it was Roman Kaufman said that he was marred more than any man. I picture him looking more like hamburger meat by the time they were done with him. That image was in my mind. And Jerry Mahor talks about how it should have been you on the cross. You were the one that deserved it. That ought to have been you hanging there. And like the scales fell off. I recognized that all my sin is gone. It's done. But then I spent a year or two kind of struggling with my sin still, happy that I'm justified and forgiven, but then very much the same way. I got sin no more. And it was kind of taboo. Like in the circles I was in, it was like, this guy doesn't sound like a normal preacher. You don't know what some of his kids have done. Like all these little stories about his mannerisms and his ways. He's kind of rude and whatever, right?
Well,
but it was so gripping to me.
It can come across that way.
But the amazing thing was, it was like for the first time I could look at it and say, that's what it says.
Yeah.
You know, it's not just one verse highlighted with a highlighter somewhere. Yeah. It's like, look at that whole passage. Look at Romans chapter 6. Look at Colossians 3. Right. Like it says it explicitly. We are crucified with him. Yeah. And I didn't need Mike Pearl anymore. Like it was, it's exactly right there in the Bible, right?
Right.
And so, so I almost like getting saved again 3 years later. Right?
That was
the
just
greatest. So thrilling.
I mean, I've had some experiences before that, some highs or whatever. And but that was the clincher, because I mean, it's just ecstatic waves of ecstasy flowing through me as I understood. My conscience bore witness that all my efforts of getting myself spiritual enough and humble enough so that God would answer my prayers and deliver me and save me and deliver me, all of that effort just when I realized that me that was trying to get himself spiritual enough was dead.
Amen.
And if God calls me dead, then that means that me is gone, and I don't have to improve myself to be accepted. How do you improve on a man that's dead and buried?
Yep.
So I could just freely, I had the faith to just believe that right now the Father is accepting me, and I was just experiencing it. I wasn't just something that I was trying to grasp a hold of with my mind. I was literally experiencing the joy and the acceptance. And then when I think of something else that I had been struggling with, oh no, that's done too. And it's just waves of the Spirit bearing witness and my conscience bearing witness. It was done. I'm free.
Absolutely. It's a weird thing to explain, right? Here I was, a grown man, 21 years old or whatever I was at the time, 22 maybe, and driving a forklift for work, and sometimes like squealing to myself out of delight and excitement. And I'm like, I can't believe this. This is so amazing, right?
Yeah.
But that's quite a story, man.
Yeah. Yeah, it was quite a journey. I felt like I was given a an advanced course in deep theology crammed into 8 messages or whatever, 9 messages, and I
Mm-hmm.
had an understanding that very few people around me had, or nobody around me had, and that how do you explain to them what you had? Because I had to listen to 8 messages or 9 messages, and it was very, very well presented, very well delineated, and like I've never heard anything like it.
Mm-hmm.
I remember the first time he mentioned and he claimed in another series called Dead to Sin or Free from Sin or whatever it was. What was the other series? You remember it had 3 tapes.
Yeah,
Alive to Dead to Sin, Alive to it's called Sanctification. It was
that's right. Yeah.
purple label. And in that series, he claimed that we died with Christ the same time he died. And when he
Yeah.
was buried, we were buried in the same grave at the same time. I was like, that's the craziest thing I ever heard in all of my life. That's how foreign, that's how little we were told about our crucifixion with Christ.
Yeah.
That's how little any of the preachers mentioned that. Good preachers, very good preachers, born again, saved, very sincere, and they're going to heaven. I don't believe that they were just religious fakes, but they did not understand that I think they understood that Christ died for us, and they had that. They
Mm-hmm.
had that pretty good down pat, but they did not understand that we died too.
That's right.
That was something that we had to do to
And
die to ourselves.
it's not an alternate experience. It's not a different experience. It's all one and the same event, right?
Well, it's supposed to be, but for me, it was another experience. But it
What I
was
mean, what I
it
mean
was
though,
my eyes being open
yeah,
to that same event, which
for
is
sure.
Christ. When Christ died, everything was done.
Yeah,
But you might see it in different stages.
yeah.
You might
What
see
I,
one part of his work one day and then realize and find out, oh, that's not all he did.
that's
He
right.
also provided not just forgiveness, but deliverance in the same work.
Exactly.
And then you find that out, and then it's another experience for you, but it was really
For sure.
just,
Where most people, when they talk about dying to self, crucifying yourself, that kind of thing, it's like this ongoing. The work of Christ happened 2,000 years ago. Now there's a work that you need to do. I mean, obviously, you and I both believe we work out our salvation with fear and
right.
trembling. There's plenty of work for us to do as Christians. But as far as getting to God goes, as far as getting free from sin goes, as far as getting forgiven goes, there's one work that was done complete once forever. And all Christians were baptized into his body. All were crucified. All were buried. All were raised again. You don't need to have something happen in your life to make that a reality. The moment you believe the gospel, all of that is true, right? So it all
It's
happened
yours.
back then. It's not something you're trying to make
Exactly.
happen, for
That
sure.
is so hard to get across to a person that right now you are dead.
Yeah.
You don't have to become dead. You are, because you got baptized into his death. But I got it. I somehow, my eyes were open, and I just rejoiced, and I didn't look at myself, try to improve myself. I just rejoiced in Christ. And it was the most freeing thing I've ever experienced.
Absolutely. I remember one of the statements that he made was something along the lines of most Christians in our culture understand and believe that salvation, forgiveness is by grace through faith, but they don't understand that sanctification or freedom from sin is also by grace through faith.
Exactly.
And that was such a revolutionary thought to me, too, to think, I don't try to get my sins forgiven, they are forgiven.
Yeah.
So I'm not trying to get free from sin. I am free from sin.
That's right.
It's stated so plainly, right?
That's so radical. Like most people, they work and work and work by Bible study, prayer, going to church and tithing and doing good works to get saved. And then we've come out of that and said, no, that doesn't save you. And then we got saved. But then, like you said, they work and pray and fast and ask God to give them freedom from sin. And they don't realize that's just as free and doesn't take any
Yeah.
more work
Just as
to get
much a
free
gift.
from sin as it did to get free from the penalty of sin.
That's right. Hey, man. Well, I mean,
So,
we've probably gone on almost as long as people want to listen to us anymore. But I would love to get the last little bit of your life, or the last 20 years of your life, maybe in a few minutes. You must have gotten married and settled down, and I know you're back in Ohio, and all kinds of good things have happened since then.
yeah, I got. Let's see. man, what all do I want to put in there? Yeah, I ended up getting married probably, let's see, in 2017. So that would be 15 years later,
Oh, wow.
or 14. I got that experience around '03, I think, where I understood the gospel. And I got married in 17. So yeah, 14 years later. And met my wife at a shindig down in Florida. I was living in Tennessee, going to Mike's church, and I learned to study the Bible while I was living down there, like for real, actually study it. Mike gave us young men down there. He sat us down every Monday night for that summer of 2013, and we learned how to study the Bible. And we'd come together, and he would ask us, "What did you find?" And then we'd give us more tips. And I mean, you can be told this is what you do, but when you actually do it, and he guides you through and points out where you missed it,
Wow,
then you really learn how to
what
study.
an opportunity.
Yeah, it was an opportunity of a lifetime. And then I would actually preach like short little sermons there at his church, and then he would give me more pointers about how I could have, presented it better. And so that's how I learned. That's my little Bible
school, yeah,
Bible
for sure.
college, not Bible college, whatever, little training thing I got there. And then I found a wife finally, which is another story. Took a long time. But yeah, I got married, and then God called us up here to Ohio, not in the same community as I grew up, further east, north, Geauga County. Well, I'm actually not in Geauga, but in that area. And so we're living up here in northeast Ohio, and we started a church, which that was not what I thought I would be doing.
Wasn't your plan necessarily?
That wasn't my plan. It's just trying to reach out to some Amish people and maybe witness to them. But I wasn't thinking about starting a church. But God gave us a building basically for free, almost anyway. And we fixed it up, and we're having church services in there. And it's really been a blessing. And it's feels like that's what I'm called to do. It's very rewarding.
Well, I had a couple of really good conversations with Eli Troyer, and my
He
wife.
told me. Yeah,
My
he
wife
told
and
me
his
about it.
wife got pretty close over that time, and even our two daughters, they're both 14, almost 15, I think, and they spent a lot of time together.
I see.
And what a joy to see Eli, right? Like you could tell he was extremely liberated even just over the last couple of years. But his wife apparently had written a letter down to No Greater Joy way
that's
back.
How we got started. That's how we
Originally
got
got you
connected.
guys out there. So
Yeah, that's an interesting story there. Very interesting. She writes them a letter, and that's how we found out that. Well, that's how we got turned on to this area.
Right. So now there's a group of mostly former Amish coming to your congregation?
Yeah, almost all former, but there's a couple that are not. There's
Okay.
one guy, let's see, two guys, and yeah, it's just a few that are not, but most of them are former Amish.
And you're good with that. You kind of recognize your calling and your ministry is mostly towards Amish people.
Yeah, it is mostly geared towards Amish people, but I don't know that it's a good idea to have all former Amish in the church. But I mean, it's whatever. I can't control who comes and who doesn't. But
yeah,
it doesn't bother me either way too much at all. But I think there's a balance when you have some different backgrounds come together. But then again, when you just preach straight from the Bible, who cares what the background is?
Exactly.
I think that when you have a lot of good just gospel preaching, even though they already know it, but you keep preaching it, it just kind of keeps people from developing in religious ruts, getting into religious ruts or cliques or whatever, and you just keep walking in freedom. It doesn't matter what background they're in or from.
Yeah, when I first got saved, I mean, I listened to a lot of people who were not from the Mennonite or plain type of background, and they talked a lot about the diversity of the church, how every tribe, every nation, every kindred, every tongue, and the book of Galatians, there's neither Jew nor Greek, and we should be able to break down those barriers. And so I was open to the idea of let's gather with many different cultures as long as they name Christ, which I'm still very open to. But as I progressed and maybe became more mature and started ministering the gospel to people, it almost always just seemed to hit the Mennonite people. And I thought, well, I mean, if what I'm preaching connects with and convicts and shows Mennonite people, Amish people, plain people the truth of the gospel, then I'll just embrace that and go with it. Like, I
Exactly.
obviously have no trouble with others, but if this is the door that's open, I'm just going to march right through, right?
Yeah, I feel like there are obviously the gospel is for everybody, but the way you present it comes across to some people better than others.
Yeah.
And Mike was the only one that got it across to me. I think the others might have been preaching the gospel, but the way it came across to me is it sounded like I wasn't humble enough and broken enough. So I was working on my box, my
Yeah.
little spiritual box that I was trying to empty of self, because they said you have to realize that you can't save yourself, and that it's not of works, and that it's all on Christ, and not what you do is what he did. So I'm trying to get to that place where I'm lost, and I'm really 100% convinced that I'm lost. And somebody would say, well, I was kind of thinking I was saved, but then uh, through preaching and God working on me, I finally realized I'm actually lost, and then I got saved.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm trying to get lost and broken and repent enough, because Christ said he came for sinners and not for the righteous. So I have to become a sinner, not realizing, I guess, that I already was. Well, I knew I
Right.
was, but I didn't feel it enough. So I'm
Yeah.
going by my feelings and trying to feel sinful so that he could give me this emotional high. So I just couldn't get myself
Interesting.
humble and lost enough.
I listened
So
to, for a couple of years, I listened to an awful lot of that revivalistic style preaching, and I could name a bunch of the speakers, but I don't necessarily need to pick on any one of them. But there was this pursuit of a second work and a deeper filling and an anointing where, same idea. I was already saved. I knew my sins were forgiven, but I couldn't quite grasp the second filling, the anointing of God, where finally, if I would just get empty enough and broken enough and humble enough and holy enough, that maybe God would give me this overwhelming sense of his grace and his anointing and his blessing. You know, it was always just this elusive thing that was just
yeah,
outside of my grasp, where I
yeah,
feel like I think I'm very close. I think I'm extremely close, but maybe I'm just
yeah.
not quite there yet, right?
Exactly. That's what was so liberating, to find out that the old man is dead. So why seek for, to be humble and broken when he's the whole person, the whole me that needed to be, that I thought needed to be broken and humble, is crucified.
Mm-hmm.
So that whole effort was, not needed because he's dead. So that's what was so liberating, that I didn't have to reach for a certain level of spirituality for God to experience freedom.
Amen.
So liberating.
Excellent. So
But
you've been married now for 5 or 6 years?
yeah, 17 to
Three.
23.
Yeah.
It's 6 years this fall, and
Couple
we got
kids?
we got one kid and one on the way.
Oh, very good. Excellent. Man, hopefully one day we get to meet up here
That would be
in
awesome.
person.
I heard that I didn't realize that Eli's went out to Iowa, but he told me he met with you guys, and it was really good. I enjoyed talking to you guys, but that would be very, very good. Maybe we can come up sometime, or you come down
For sure,
sometime.
for sure. Well, I know a lot of people there had never been to Canada and they weren't sure how do you get across the border, what do you have to have, and
Yeah, I wouldn't
many of them
too
didn't
sure
have
either.
passports and stuff, right? So
Well, I have that.
there you go.
So
Yeah, we should definitely meet up sometime. That'd be good.
yeah, I would love to. I
Cool.
surely would. I really would. But you
Well,
are one of those. I don't I don't think I know a lot of people that really understand our crucifixion with Christ, and that we are. I mean, there are more and more anymore,
yep.
the people who listen to Mike, but people from the Amish or plain background, they usually don't really seem to understand that.
Or some people, they kind of understand it, but it's almost like just a passing doctrine to them, which confuses me. Like,
Yeah,
oh yeah, of course I'm crucified with Christ. Like, how does that not blow your socks off? Like, how do you not,
yeah, they don't
how
really
are you
get it.
not just beside yourself with amazement and worship,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But
Well, it's good to hear it again from another person, because sometimes I just need to be reminded again, because it kind of wears off and you
yeah,
have to hear it again.
and you're preaching quite a bit there.
Oh yeah, I preach pretty much every Sunday
Okay.
for now. Hopefully I'll get some more established where they can take my place or help with that.
Yeah. Interesting. How far away is your brother Andrew?
An
Oh, you
hour and
said
20
hour,
minutes.
hour and
Yeah.
20 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay. And he does some teaching there too, has kind of almost started his own church also.
Yeah, at his place. Yeah.
Yeah.
But we have not exchanged pulpits yet. So
Very good.
well, he came over. He did preach one time here, and I guess I did. I used to preach at his place when we first moved to Ohio. Before we started this church, we would drive an hour and 20 minutes to go to their church, and I'd help him preach. We'd take turns, and
Hmm.
that was fun. It was a blessing. He liked it a lot to have that burden, share it with somebody else, and he really hated it when we moved. We stopped coming and started our church here. But that's what God has called us to do. We didn't know it at the time that we're going to start a church here, but that's what ended up happening, and it's a real blessing to be able to minister to people like that.
Very exciting. No, that
So
sounds like a real blessing even to have your brother that you can connect with that way too. So I've got a couple of brothers also that I really connect well with. I mean, almost all of them I connect well with, but a couple of them that moved out west to Alberta, so they're 3 days drive from me, right?
I
So,
see. So
but
did your family end up leaving? Like,
yeah, I mean it's a bit of a long story too, but the old colony had a bit of a split in it, and it was the only
oh,
split
okay.
that I was ever aware of in our congregation. One of the preachers who had the year before done our wedding ceremony, he wanted to start preaching in some English, like just a few snippets in English, just so the young people could understand a little bit, and maybe do some Bible study. And apparently there was some political issues with one of the elections. He felt like the preachers had rigged the election for a new leader of some sort. I never got the full details there,
Oh my
but
goodness. Religious rigging. I
that's
thought it was
right.
all just in the political realm.
No, it happens everywhere. So then we left with him, not with any intent of becoming Christian or carrying our Bibles around or anything like that, but just maybe we should have some English. But that opened the floodgates for us to now listen to other things outside of the old colony congregation, and the charity ministries tapes and CDs started getting passed around, and some other stuff I was listening to, and so yeah,
That's what I started out with,
okay.
charity tapes and stuff.
So
And
I
then
was a newlywed man, had been baptized at the old colony church, gone through the motions, had in the nomen des Vaters and des Sohnes and des Heiligen Geistes, the water poured on my head, right? And my mom felt the Holy Spirit in the room. She was sure of it. And about a year after we got married, I understood the gospel, and I realized I had been a child of the devil till this point, right?
yeah.
I needed to be born again, and I was. And so when I got baptized, my family was obviously very, very terrified. It's weird that one of the doctrines the old colony holds to is that a second baptism is the blaspheming of the Holy Ghost.
Uh,
And so now I had
wow.
committed the unpardonable sin.
Wow.
I was no longer welcome at my in-laws for like 2 years. I never was able to go there, and my parents, like, they would have nightmares about my lost state, and it was bad, right?
Wow.
But then
Wow. That's
now,
bad.
20 years later, I mean, I've had Bible study with my dad many times. He leads some Bible studies every now and then. My father-in-law, he listens to the German radio station, which has the gospel being preached
Oh,
on it.
wow.
And so everything's fine and good now, and I couldn't
Okay.
have planned it better, right? It's
Yeah. Yeah. Same here. My parents ended up leaving too and getting saved. And all of my siblings are out except two of my sisters.
hmm,
They were married when we left, or when my family left. So they couldn't really join us.
okay. Well,
So,
man, keep preaching. Hopefully, people will tune into Sin No More and get free from sin that way also.
yeah. Yeah. Go to their website and get it yourself. But
Do
that's
you
the
have do you have any kind of social media platform or anything that you share on?
Yeah, I preach and I put my messages on Facebook and YouTube. I try to do it live, but sometimes we have technical problems. But just look up my name
Okay.
on either one of those, YouTube or Facebook. I know there's another Moses Schrock on there, but I'm not the one with the big white beard. So make sure
Okay.
get the right one. And because he's a Seventh Day Adventist. But you can look at my website. I have called freebyfaith.net, where I try to present the gospel in written form. I don't have videos on there. Maybe I have a
Okay.
link of some video, but freebyfaith.net is where I try to explain this thing about crucified with Christ and all these different angles. I have all these key words that I traced down in the Bible and tried to put it into an article or a page in the website. The idea is if you don't get it in one page, click on another keyword that talks about the gospel from another angle. Okay. By the time you read all of my material, you should have a very good grasp of the gospel.
Right on.
All
Very
right.
good. I appreciate it, man.
Absolutely.